Over the weekend, independent senator from Vermont and progressive icon Bernie Sanders publicly reaffirmed his support for President Biden in the 2024 election. But before we unpack all of that and the context and what it might mean for that election, if you haven't yet, please hit that like, subscribe, and the alert bell. Maybe check out my Patreon. I'd appreciate the support. All right, folks, so Bernie Sanders, again, he's basically a pop culture icon at this point. He's a political phenomenon in terms of his popularity, in terms of his name recognition. He has been a stalwart progressive for decades. He's been an independent for decades, one of three, as a matter of fact, I believe, in the Senate, along with Angus King from Maine and the rightly reviled Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona, who switched party affiliation several months ago from Democrat to independent. Now, all three of them caucus with the Democrats. It's what enables the Democrats to keep their razor-thin majority in the Senate. And he ran, of course, for president in 2016 and in 2020. Now, before we get into the impact, I guess the additional impact that Bernie Sanders has had on our politics, which I think is considerable, especially when you consider his relatively anemic legislative history, right? I mean, it's not like he is a legislative powerhouse by any stretch of the imagination. He is certainly an excellent rhetorician. He's an excellent mover and, speaker in terms of like moving hearts and minds towards the progressive left. But one of the things that he did is several months ago, he went out and publicly declared his support for President Biden in the 2024 election, well ahead of schedule. And it upset a lot of progressives who felt that Bernie was basically moving to coronate Joe Biden into a second term rather than encouraging a robust primary. And in the months since then, other prominent progressive legislators, like even Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in the House of Representatives, she came out and also publicly supported President Biden's reelection. So now, in response to a lot of progressive backlash, specifically from Cornel West, a philosopher and a civil rights activist who is now running third party, I think under the Green candidate, he's a candidate for the Green Party. He has publicly criticized Senator Sanders and other progressives for supporting Biden. Bernie Sanders went on CNN, and he had this to say. We're going to play the clip, and we will unpack it together.
Senator Sanders, Cornel West, who is a close ally of yours, he is running a third-party campaign for president. He recently criticized you for endorsing President Biden's reelection. Listen to what he said.
I love the brother, and even in love, people have deep disagreements about these things. But I think, again, he's fearful of the neo-fascism of Trump. People look at Biden, they don't really want to tell the full truth. He's created the best economy that we can get. Is this the best that we can get? You're going to tell that lie to the people just for Biden to win?
What's your reaction to that?
Before Senator Sanders responds, before Bernie responds, I just want to say I don't think Bernie Sanders or any progressive for that matter say that Biden has created the best economy we can get. I think what they've said is that President Biden has presided over, an economic miracle in terms of the recovery that we've had, some of the strides that we've taken. But I would be shocked, I would be astounded if Bernie or AOC or anybody said this is the best we can do or even hinted at that, because, of course, number one, that would be false. Number two, that would just be politically crazy. But anyway, take it away, Bernie.
Well, my reaction is that certainly it's not the best economy that we can create. That was what my speech was about yesterday. We've got to join the rest of the industrialized world, guarantee health care to all. We've got to cut the cost of prescription drugs in half. We've got to raise the minimum wage to at least $17 an hour. We've got to build the affordable housing we desperately need. But where I disagree with my good friend, Cornel West, is I think in these really very difficult times where there is a real question whether democracy is going to remain in the United States of America. Donald Trump is not somebody who believes in democracy, whether women are going to be able to continue to control their own bodies, whether we have social justice in America, we end bigotry. Around that, I think we have got to bring the entire progressive community to defeat Trump or whoever the Republican nominee will be, support Biden, but at the same time, which is what I did yesterday, is demand that the Democratic Party, not just Biden, have the guts to take on corporate greed and the massive levels of income and wealth inequality that we see today.
Sanders.
So, listen, I thought that was an excellent answer, because here's the thing. And it's been forever since this happened, back in 2015, 2016. So, of course, again, Bernie Sanders ran for the primary for the Democratic nomination in 2015, 2016 against Hillary Clinton. He lost the primary. Now, there are some credible reports to indicate there was I don't want to say skullduggery, but that the DNC put its thumb on the scale a bit for Secretary Clinton. I don't want to relitigate that. But the bottom line is, after she won the primary nomination. She ended up losing against Donald Trump, even though she still won the popular vote by more than 3 million votes. And this was due to a confluence of factors. One of the factors that people point to, and again, it's been so long I'd have to revisit the data to see if there was any real support for it, is there were a lot of people who say Bernie supporters didn't turn out enough after Secretary Clinton won the nomination to support her. Like, okay, Bernie was your first choice, you back Bernie loses the primary, therefore Bernie and everybody else should have given, and his supporters, should have given full-throated endorsements to Secretary Clinton against Donald Trump. Now, to whatever extent you want to relitigate that in 2016, and I'm sure there is some data to suggest that, quote-unquote, Bernie bros did not turn up enough, that certainly wasn't the case in 2020. To whatever extent it matters, when Bernie Sanders ran against Joe Biden in 2020 and lost to Joe Biden, they worked together. Biden was smart enough to recognize he needed Bernie's supporters in that progressive bloc. He couldn't just win by being moderate old Uncle Joe, even if that was what his instincts were. He needed to court the progressives. And so he and Bernie worked hand in glove during the remainder of the campaign, and Bernie has had an incredible influence on the Biden administration as well as the progressive bloc in general, especially when Ron Klain was chief of staff. And so what we've seen is that Biden, even though he is probably temperamentally, as I've said before, more of an establishment centrist, which is aggravating, he has governed as many progressive people, like including AOC and I think Bernie Sanders as well, he has governed much more progressively than they expected, in large part because Biden recognizes he needs to make concessions. He can't always just move back to the right or the center. He has to placate the left as well, and that's good. And it's good that the left kind of throws that around a bit. It's like, Mr. President, we're going to back you, but you need us. You can't always just make Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema happy. Sometimes you got to make us happy, even if it makes them unhappy. Sometimes there's got to be that tension. And I certainly don't envy President Biden's position. But Bernie Sanders is absolutely right here. Like, again, I've said it before, as much as I like Joe Biden's not my ideal president for a variety of reasons, okay? I certainly give him credit where credit's due. I think he's governed much more progressively than expected. But if it's with so much on the line, with the Republican Party going for broke and being obstructionist, and there's such an animated fascist strain running through that party, I don't think now is the time to try to make any major sudden shifts. Now, again, progressives will say, well, it's still primary season, so it's okay to try to court more progressives to challenge President Biden, people like Cornel West or whoever, and then if and when Biden triumphs in the primary election, like Marianne Williams is another one, sorry, I blanked on her name, and then if and when President Biden triumphs in the primary, then everybody could coalesce around him because he's the next best option. Again, I would have to see data on that, but I think at least intuitively, I understand where that makes sense. But I also understand where people are like, well, listen, you don't want to put Biden, because he's in all probability going to win the primary, you don't want to put him through a brutal primary race where he's being savaged left, right, and center by other competitors, which can then be weaponized by conservatives and Republicans and perhaps potentially depress the vote. It may very well be possible that if you put Biden basically through the gauntlet in the primary and then he emerges, that you will have effectively encouraged at least some elements of the left to go, well, hell, I mean, they were making the case that Biden sucks, so I'm not going to vote for him in the general, because who cares? I understand that cost-benefit analysis, and I get where Bernie Sanders is coming from, because that's where my instincts are at this point. Like, given the risk, given the consequences, given the alternative of a fascist like Trump retaking the White House, I would want to play it safe. And I would be encouraging, hey, progressives, listen, let's just get through one more term of Joe Biden. The first term wasn't that bad at all. As a matter of fact, we made quite a bit of strides. Let's stave off fascism. Let's live to fight another day as we continue to make more progressive strides under the Biden administration than we have in any previous administration, certainly in modern history. You probably have to go all the way back to at least LBJ, if not FDR. So anyway, I understand where he's coming from. I'm glad that he is marshaling his troops, so to speak, to be full-throated in their endorsement of President Biden, because the stakes could not be higher and the margin for error could not be thinner.